Welcome back to our third of 7 conversations about the scriptures. We're reviewing this version of the Bible. In our previous conversation, we discovered that 116 verses were deleted from one book of the Bible in the scriptures. It makes me wonder, if you remove that much scripture from the scriptures, can you really even call a version of the Bible like this the scriptures? I personally don't think so. We already talked about that though, so let's move on to look at something else. So the scriptures uses a lot of Hebrew words and names, which is great. The problem is they teach people how to pronounce them in ways that nobody actually pronounces them. Basically, the scriptures teaches bad Hebrew. And so let's have a look at that together. Firstly, so this is one of the positive things about this Bible. It uses a fair number of Hebrew words, and then it also tries to use kind of some fresh English words for old, sometimes cliched concepts. Something that many of us really appreciate. The translators say in the preface that they earnestly encourage every genuine student of the scriptures to get to grips with the original language of the scriptures, that is, with Hebrew. It's definitely, as a Hebrew teacher and someone who is passionate about helping people to get closer to the original language of the Bible that Messiah himself read, that's definitely an encouragement that I can get behind. One of the stated aims of the scriptures is to be, quote, a translation which restores the meaning to so many words which have become popular to use but don't accurately reflect the meaning of the original. For example, church, glory, holy, sacrifice, soul, etc. So this is a really fascinating thing about the scriptures. Maybe you've noticed this. If you just read the same version of the Bible all the time, you kind of begin to fall into these mental ruts. So you always read it the same way. You kind of think the same things. Maybe your brain even goes on autopilot a little bit while you're reading. And then if you've ever read a different translation, you're like, whoa, they phrased this in a new way. This is really new and different. And it makes you think. And that's definitely something that the scriptures does when it comes to their vocabulary and the words that are chosen to translate certain concepts. So I'll give you a little bit of a list here. And these aren't Hebrew words necessarily, but they're kind of related because we're talking about how certain Hebrew words are translated. So, for example, where most Bibles have the word hope, the scriptures have expectation. Where most would say faith, the scriptures say belief. For tribulation, we have distress. For king, sovereign. For kingdom of heaven, reign of the heavens. For new covenant, renewed covenant. And yes, the Hebrew does in fact mean both. Brit Chadashah means new and renewed covenant. For disciples, taught ones. For holy, set apart. For soul, being. For glory, esteem. For crucify, impale. For scribe, scholar. For will, desire. For apostle, emissary. For cross, timber or stake. For gospel, good news. For baptize, immerse. We already talked about that one. And then we also mentioned how instead of having the word church, which has definitely more of a strong Christian connotation, they use the word assembly, which is a little more neutral. And then for the Hebrew word kipod, which is translated as hedgehog in other Bibles, they have the word hedgehog. And the reason I mention that is because in these Bible reviews, one of the hallmarks is we ask whether they translate the word kipod as hedgehog. And in fact, in every single Bible they do. And I just think hedgehogs are really cute. So this is a little opportunity for us to look at a couple of pictures of cute hedgehogs. So here's one, all kind of relaxing in somebody's hand. Here's one with a funny little set of lips. He doesn't actually look very happy about this. And then finally, here's one of a cute little hedgehog with wearing a little hat. And hopefully that's a girl hedgehog, or if it's a boy, he might feel a little awkward right now. All right. So, so anyways, the scriptures does indeed render the Hebrew word kipod as hedgehog. And then they also They do have some Hebrew words that are, instead of being translated, they are transliterated. So, they're Hebrew words written in English letters. So, for instance, we have tzitzit, fringes or tassels. That's tzitzit. For Egypt, this is interesting. It's written Mitzrayim, which is indeed the Hebrew word for Egypt. And then this is kind of fascinating. A bit of a hybrid. For the Egyptians, we have the Mitzrites. So people from Mitzrayim are Mitzrites, I guess. And then for Torah, we simply have we have that transliterated as we talked about. One more thing, the translators also point out, quote, the rendering of words such as Hades, a Greek term loaded with pagan connotations, variously rendered by different translators as pit, grave, and hell, by their Hebrew or Aramaic equivalent instead, such as Sheol. So they use the word Sheol instead of using the Greek word Hades, which apparently is loaded with pagan connotations, and they also avoid some of those English words like pit, grave, and hell. All right, so that's a little bit about some of the novel words that are used in the scriptures, which could snap you out of autopilot and get you thinking and give you a slightly fresh look at some old concepts. So related is Hebrew names. The scriptures tries to transliterate Hebrew names so that they're actually written the way they're pronounced in Hebrew. A problem, though, is that the way these names are written in the scriptures, no one actually says them that way, and so that really is a significant problem. And here's an example from the table of contents, which we already looked at. So what would be an example of some names in here? So for instance, Matthew is Matityahu. John is Yochanan, James is Yaakov, and you can hear that I'm actually pronouncing these a little bit differently than the way they are written here, which is what we're gonna talk about right away here, because it's a little bit of an issue. So let's talk about this for a couple minutes, how the scriptures basically teaches bad Hebrew. So Hebrew is the language of a country in the Middle East today. There are roughly 6 million people in that country who speak Hebrew as their first language. They grew up speaking Hebrew. There are like Hebrew dictionaries. It's an academic language, used in universities and by scholars and whatnot. Hebrew is the language of the country of Israel, the nation of Israel, spoken by literally millions of Israelis. Not only that, but historically, Hebrew has been and is the language of the Jewish people. In fact, Hebrew has never been the language of any other country, any other people group other than the Jewish people. Aside from the question of whether Hebrew was spoken before the time of the Tower of Babel, that's a different question. The fact is, Hebrew is the language of Israel, the language of the Jewish people. In fact, the Bible even states this by not only referring to Hebrew as Ivrit or Hebrew, but there are also a couple places where it's referred to as Yehudit. And Yehudit means the language spoken by the Yehudim, the Judeans or Jews. So, roughly, if you were to roughly equivalent that into English, Yehudit would mean Jewish. So Hebrew isn't just the language of Israel, Hebrew is the Jewish language. And even the Bible acknowledges that by not only calling it Ivrit, but also calling it Ivrit, Yehudit, sorry. And so that's a relevant fact. If you want to learn Hebrew, you should learn Hebrew the way it is spoken and has been spoken for the last several thousand years by the Jewish people, because really that's the only way to speak it. Not only is this important from a functional perspective, that way people can actually understand what you're saying or what you're trying to say. That's kind of important. Remember the Tower of Babel? And remember how when people started then they couldn't understand each other anymore, it got really confusing and it was like this huge catastrophe. Yeah, so you kind of have to understand the other person in what they're trying to say. Like, that's how language works, right? So not only is it important from a functional perspective, but this is important from a relational perspective also. Let's say that you are a follower of Messiah from the nations and you're wanting to learn Hebrew. You owe it to the Jewish people to be respectful to them, and that includes being respectful to their language, if for no other reason than that it's good PR. So, you claim to represent Yeshua, the King of the Jews. So, if you start learning this version of Hebrew that like nobody actually pronounces that way, maybe Jewish people or Israelis just are like, huh? They think it's weird. You're not doing a good job representing Messiah. I'm sorry, you're just not. And so that's why this is important. It's not a matter of just being right. It's about that relationship. It's about your mission to represent the Messiah. It's about our calling to have an attitude that is respectful and honoring towards the nation of Israel, towards the people of Israel, into whom, if you are from the nations, you have been grafted in through faith. All right, so having talked a little bit about why this is important in the heart of the matter, I'm going to show you 6 ways that the scriptures teaches bad Hebrew. These are 6 problems, and okay. So firstly, in the scriptures, instead of writing like the V sound, instead of using a V for that, they use a W. They teach people to say W instead of W. And as you probably know, Vav is the 6th letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and it is pronounced V. It is not pronounced W. Nobody pronounces it that way. And unfortunately, though, that's not what we see in the scriptures transliteration. So, for instance, the 3rd book of the Torah is Vayikra, which means "and he called," as you can see here, but it is written as Vayikra. And there are lots of examples here. For instance, Vayetze, Vayishlach, Vayeshev, they're all pronounced with a wa. So Vayetze, Vayishlach, Vayeshev. And my question is, why? Why was this done? I'm assuming that there was an assumption made on the part of the translators that maybe thousands of years ago, people pronounce the V with the softer W sound. And there is that idea out there in the academic world. The problem is that that's not how the Jewish people speak Hebrew anymore. So that is like an absolutely archaic relic. And if you don't know better, let's say that you are new to the Hebrew roots of your faith and you're wanting to learn some Hebrew, so you get a copy of the scriptures, you're actually just going to start you're going to assume that this is the way Hebrew is spoken. And what they don't tell you is that that's not true. This is not how Hebrew is spoken by the Jewish people. Okay, so that's a problem not only when it comes to these names of the books of the Bible, but when it comes to people's names also. So, for instance, David is written as Dawid, like Eve or Hava is written as Hawa. Esau, who is Esav in Hebrew, is written as Esau, and then Levi is written as which is Levi in Hebrew is written as Lewi, and then the Levites, or the Levium, as we would say in Hebrew, are the Lewites. I don't even know how to say that because nobody talks that way. So that's our first problem. Secondly, instead of the letter T, the sound T, in the scriptures, this is written with the soft sound th, like with the TH. So, for instance, you can see that in the first, the name of the book of Genesis, Bereshit. So here it's written as Bereshith, and similarly, we have the 2nd book of the Torah, which is Exodus, or in Hebrew it's Shemot, and it's written as Shemoth. I don't even know. Just nobody really reads Hebrew this way, except for maybe a couple of people in their academic ivory towers who want to try to pronounce Hebrew the way they think it was pronounced thousands of years ago, the way they surmise. Now, kind of the ironic thing about this, okay, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but when you have the hard t sound in Hebrew. Now, the exception to this is if you're Ashkenazi. So, the way Hebrew is spoken in Israel today is the Sephardic pronunciation, which has the hard t sound at the end of words. So, for instance, the Sabbath is Shabbat. Sukkot, the festival of booths is Sukkot. So that's how Hebrew is spoken in Israel, and generally by the Jews around the world. If you're part of kind of the really Orthodox Ashkenazi Jewish community, you may say the ta with the softer sa sound. So instead of saying Shabbat, you'd say Shabbos. Instead of saying Sukkot, you would say Sukkos. But that's a very small minority pronunciation, and that's different than saying it with that lispy th sound. Anyways, nobody says Shabbath or Sukkot or whatever. Nobody says it that way. So there are those two different ways of saying the ta sound in Hebrew today, the letter tav. So most Jewish people and definitely Israelis would say with the ta, and then you have the small number of Ashkenazi Jews who would say it with the sa, but nobody says it with a tha. So just to clarify that. Now, what's ironic is that when the Bible was first translated into English, they translated that hard ta sound with the softer tha sound, and I don't know why. So, for instance, you have the prophet Nathan, and in English Bibles he came out as Nathan, and of course we see that as Nathan. What would be some other examples? The town where Yeshua was born is Beit Lechem in Hebrew, which means the house of bread, and then for some reason in English it's Bethlehem. I don't know why it isn't Bethlehem. I don't know if the translators assumed we couldn't say that hard ta sound, or I don't understand why that happened. But ironically, with the scriptures using this tha sound, it sounds kind of similar to how people say these Hebrew names in English anyway. So if you're trying to learn the original Hebrew pronunciation, it doesn't really help, because they basically just give you the way it's pronounced in English in Christian Bibles. So for instance, Nathan is Nathan in the scriptures. Matityahu, who is Matthew, is Matithyahu, and then Bethlehem is Bethlehem. So those would be some examples. Again, you might say, well, that what's the big deal? It sounds very similar. Well, it is a big deal. Seriously, if you talk that way, you're going to sound very lispy to Hebrew speakers or people who just know the language, and you don't want to sound really lispy to them, because sounding lispy isn't then really, it's not desirable if you're trying to learn a language and trying to pronounce it the way the speakers of the language actually pronounce it. So basically, if you use the scriptures, you're going to sound like this to Israelis and to the Jewish people. And I mean, if you want to sound that way, you can. But I just thought at the very least you might want me to warn you about that. Okay, we're going to look at another problem here. Okay, so this is a pronunciation table in the preface to the scriptures. You can see here that they use this the English letter B underlined to represent the sound v. This doesn't make any sense at all to me. So, in English, we have this v sound, and we actually have a letter for that. It's the letter V. So the letter V represents the v sound. In English, nobody writes the V sound with a B, like the letter B with underlined. Nobody writes it that way. Maybe in some academic circles they have some really technical version of transliteration where they do that, but the scriptures was not made for academics sitting in their ivory towers. The scriptures was made for your average Bible believer who just wants to get closer to the original, maybe learn some Hebrew. So the scriptures is not doing those people a favor by writing the V sound with the letter B. It's very confusing, basically. And so once again, ironically, this is what the original translators of the Bible into English did, where you have the v sound in the original Hebrew. They wrote the letter B, which is confusing because we do have the letter V in our language and we can say that sound, but for some reason the translators didn't write Hebrew names as accurately as they could have. They kind of made up this new English version, which in my opinion is unfortunate. It's one more way that that believers were taken away from the original text of the Bible. It's one more way that that Christianity was distanced from its Jewish roots, if you could put it that way. So I'll give you some examples in the scriptures. We have Yaakov, who of course was the son of Isaac. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But in the scriptures, that's written as Yaakov. So we have Yocheved or Jochebed, which is written as Yochebed instead of Yocheved. Elisheva is written as Elisheba. Avraham is written as Abraham. I'm not sure why. Again, can people not say Avraham? And then Ruvain is written as Rubain, and Abigail is written as Abigail. This isn't just a problem from the perspective of wanting to learn Hebrew the way it's pronounced, as we already talked about. It's also a problem because when you pronounce Hebrew this way, you sound like this. You basically sound very congested. You sound like you're pinching your nose, and so then instead of saying Yaakov, you say Yaakov, because that's the way congested people sound. Yaakov, or Elisheva, Yochebed, Abraham. Avraham. It's just, you don't want to sound that way if you're learning Hebrew. You want to learn Hebrew the way it's actually spoken, so that you can use the language, and so people don't look at you funny. Generally speaking, Israel is a relatively new country, and most of the people who moved to Israel in the last 130 years since the beginning of the Zionist movement, or I should say 140 years actually, they had to learn Hebrew. And so Hebrew is and still today, people make Aliyah, they immigrate to Israel, and they need to learn the language. And so there are always lots of people who are learning, they're learning Hebrew in Israel. And so basically Israelis, they're all like language teachers. They're very helpful that way. You're trying to learn some Hebrew, you're struggling to say something, and they'll kind of give you some helpful little corrections and help you along, right? So if you're trying to learn Hebrew, and you're actually trying to use it with Israelis or Jewish people, if you say something wrong, they may just try to helpfully correct you and be like, oh, you mean this, Avraham, not Abraham, and you don't want to really put them in that position because it's kind of awkward. But then also, or they might just look at you funny and be like, okay, you have your own personal version of Hebrew, how makes you a very special snowflake, and we're not going to go there. So those are a couple of the responses that you're going to get when you use your lispy Hebrew, or you use your congested Hebrew, because you learned it from the scriptures. And again, do you really want that? So I felt like at the very least that should be something that you should be informed about, and then you can make your own informed decision from there. All right, let's go on to the fourth problem with the way the scriptures teaches Hebrew. Instead of the duh sound, they teach people to say the sound, like th. And you can see that right here. So we have these the letter D, but there's that little that sneaky little underline there, and so in the pronunciation here it says it's pronounced like DH, as like the TH in this and that. So the scriptures say that instead of pronouncing Aleph Bet Gimel Dalet with the duh sound, you should actually say th, as in this or that, and that is simply wrong. Very awkward. So for instance, we have the fourth book of the Torah, Bamidbar, in the wilderness. According to this, you'd actually be saying it Bamidbar, or similarly, the father of us, like the human father of us all, Adam. According to this, you'd be saying his name Adam. Please don't say his name Adam. Similarly, Judah, Yudah. According to this, you'd be saying Yudha, or even worse. So David's name, it already got written as Dawid in here. According to that, you'd be saying Dawid. So this just in also breaking news. There was actually a picture that was taken of King David, wherever he happens to be right now, as we were just busy butchering his name, and apparently that bothered him. You don't want to make David mad. He was quite the warrior king. All right, a little bit of humor there for you. But really, it doesn't. Nobody pronounces Hebrew this way, and I don't think you would even want to pronounce Hebrew this way. Again, it's based on this surmise that thousands of years ago Hebrew was pronounced a different way. But they don't tell you that in the scriptures. They just tell you, oh, this is the way you should pronounce Hebrew, and it's like, well, actually, no. All right. So problem number 5, for the letter G where it's written there, which is the Hebrew letter Gimel, they say that's to be pronounced as a soft G, as in GH. I don't even know what that means. Like, what is a soft G? I don't know. Like, the ISR is based out of South Africa, and maybe there's like a soft G in Afrikaans. I don't know. But what I do know is in English, we don't have that. Maybe babies, when they're like gaga gooing, maybe they make a soft G sound, but you don't want to sound like a gaga goo goo baby when you're pronouncing Hebrew, as far as I know. So if you do want to develop your own kind of cutesy baby talk Hebrew, definitely go with the soft G. But if you actually just want to be intelligible in how you pronounce your Hebrew words and names, then don't go with this mispronunciation table. That's problem 5. Last problem, number 6, is that they use an inconsistent system of transliteration. So they don't always use the same laws, which again is kind of confusing to me. So for instance, we have the Festival of Weeks, which is also known as Pentecost. And the Hebrew word for week is Shavua. So weeks are Shavuot. Maybe if you celebrate Shabbat, maybe you learned how to say Shavua Tov, have a good week. All right, so in the scriptures that would be Shavua Tov. You might want to say that sometime, just to your friends, just kind of to make them smile. Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov. I don't know if you've heard that song. It's kind of a song we sing at Havdalah. It's the little ceremony that we do, that we the Jewish people do at the end of Shabbat. So Shavua is week, Shavuot is weeks, but in the scriptures this is written as Shabuoth. You may not want to say Shabuoth. It's not how we refer to the festival. It's the festival of Shavuot, not Shabuoth. Now, this is what's interesting. They write Shavuot as Shabuoth, but when it comes to a couple of the other festivals that are more widely known, they don't write it that way. So, for instance, the festival, unleavened bread is matzah. The plural is matzot, and that's actually how it's written in the scriptures. So instead of writing matzoth, which is what they should write to be consistent, it's written as matzot. So I appreciate that. That's one little good step, like in the right direction, but it's only one. Another very small step is instead of writing Sukkoth or Sukkoth for the festival of booths, it is written as Sukkot. So again, it's inconsistent. Like in most cases, the Thaw sound is written as TH, like Shabuoth, but then when it comes to festivals that are more widely known, and that are actually referred to, in the Hebrew by more people, it's the more, the pronunciation that we actually use is used. So that's inconsistent. I don't understand it. I mentioned a couple reasons that this is important. It's important from a relationship perspective. Our mission to represent Messiah and accurately as possible to his own Jewish people. I don't know if making up your own version of Hebrew might sometimes be symptomatic of replacement theology too. So we talked about this a little bit already, but replacement theology is basically the belief that the church replaced Israel, that the body of Messiah replaced the Jewish community, kind of like that. There's this displacement. So it's like the Israel used to be at the center of God's plan and have that special place in his heart, but now but now we have Christianity and we have the church, and so basically the Jewish people just got pushed out of the way, and now we, speaking as Christians, or speaking as the corporate church, now we are at the center of the universe, and we are at the center of God's plan, and we have that special place in His heart. That's kind of the mentality of replacement theology. So if someone, for instance, is reading the Bible with a replacement theology mentality, wherever there is a promise to Israel, they say, oh, that promise is for me, or oh, that promise is for the church. And hey, it could very well be that that promise is for you as an individual, and that it is for the body of Messiah. But it's important to recognize that in context, that promise was given to and still belongs to the people of Israel. And Paul made that really quite clear in his conversation in Romans chapters 9 to 11 also. Specifically at the beginning of, is it Romans chapter 9, where he says, these are the things that continue to belong to, he refers to his flesh and blood Jewish brethren. So that's, the physical, that's like the nation of Israel, the physical Jewish people. I kind of wonder even if sometimes this whole making up your own version of Hebrew could be a symptom of replacement theology, the belief that the Jewish people are irrelevant, they have been displaced, how they speak their own language now doesn't matter anymore because we're at the center of the universe, and so we're just going to try and figure this out ourselves, and we're going to use our own version of Hebrew. I don't know. I'll put the question out there to you. What I do know, though, is, as I'd mentioned, if you use your own alternative version of Hebrew that sounds lispy, that sounds congested, that sounds like baby talk, etc., you are going to probably lose most of your credibility with anybody who knows Hebrew, who speaks Hebrew, because most people, whether they be Jewish or non-Jewish, they learn Hebrew the way it's actually used. I kind of like this, like if you can imagine somebody, this is dating this review to a certain degree, but we're already past the presidential elections. But if you can imagine someone who's like, no, the president's name, his true name isn't Donald Trump. That's not the true name. That's not an accurate pronunciation. His name is the true name of the president is Donalth Thrump. And if they tell you otherwise, that's fake news and they're wrong. We should all be saying Donalth Thrump. How would you look at that guy? You would raise your eyebrows. You'd probably kind of laugh, and then you really wouldn't take him seriously, and you might even have a hard time taking anything else that he says seriously. So basically, if you learn your Hebrew from the scriptures, you are going to be the rough equivalent of this guy. Telling everybody that you have the true name or the accurate pronunciation of Hebrew and everybody else is wrong. Yeah. So, again, I put that out there to you. You can make your own, hopefully, informed decision now. But I would encourage you to not learn your Hebrew from the scriptures. Learn how to pronounce Hebrew from actual Hebrew teachers. For instance, I am a Hebrew teacher. I have taught Hebrew online and in person for over a decade. I have taught literally thousands of students. I have spent over a year in Israel. I have read through the Hebrew Bible itself multiple times, the Torah probably like 8 or 10 times. I've read through at least 3 different translations of the New Testament into Hebrew multiple times. I know my stuff. So, I'm not just saying this as somebody who comes along and has an opinion. I'm saying this, and, I'm, as a Jewish person, I'm also very involved with the Jewish community. Almost every different branch of the Jewish community. I've had memberships at several different synagogues. So, I'm saying this as someone who is very involved in the Jewish community, who actually uses Hebrew, who has spent considerable amount of time in Israel, who has literally spent tens of thousands of hours in the Hebrew text of the Bible. So, my encouragement would be to you, if you want to use the scriptures, just don't learn your Hebrew from the scriptures. Learn your Hebrew from credible sources, from good teachers. And then, if you see names and they're written kind of funny in the scriptures, just say them the right way. So where it says Yaakov, just say Yaakov. Where it says Bereshith, say Breshit. Because you learned your Hebrew the way we actually use it. All right. This is a big topic. I had already mentioned that we have this series of conversations about problems with sacred name teachings, and also the sacred name Bibles that are inspired by them. A couple of these talks that you may find useful if you want to explore this topic more. Look at problem 4, how sacred name teachings are based on a misunderstanding of language. Language is functional. Problem 8, sacred name teachings are a new form of replacement theology. And then also, those are going to, problem 7, we already touched on how these teachings will destroy our witness to the Jewish community. You're going to lose your credibility. We touched on that. So again, we have the link to this playlist, this series of talks underneath this video. So look for those, and hopefully you'll find those useful if you want more information. In our next conversation, we are going to talk about how the scriptures can sometimes be super literal to the point of like a wooden translation, kind of clunky. But then when it comes to the Hebrew word Elohim, it's very inconsistent. Sometimes it transliterates that as Elohim, and then other times it uses the word mighty ones, and it kind of creates this split that isn't there in the original language. We're also going to talk about the rationale behind that. The people behind the ISR believe that the English word God is a dirty word and that people shouldn't use it, and so that's why they use the terms Elohim and mighty ones. So we'll go into that in greater detail in our next conversation, and thanks for joining me.